Are we a white supremacist society? I mean, a white supremacist society would not have a African-American president and then an African-American vice president and then 3 out of the 5 billionaires in Hollywood African-American. It's one religion attacking another religion.
And so what you're saying is that it's promoted as a belief that you can't question, rather than, say, a philosophy or an idea that's up for debate and up for scrutiny.
What's the first thing these people did? 1776 does not exist. We're going to make up a number out of thin air with the first African American, and they had a whole sort of biblical Genesis type of new beginning of America. And then they said we're going to go through and wipe out all of the iconic statuary. This wokeism has to destroy our past. It has to convince people in the present that we control the past and therefore the future is ours too. That's what Orwell said.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. So that was a trailer of the interview I just did with Victor Davis Hanson, which you can watch only right now on our platform, Epoch TV. And I mentioned, folks, that we've launched our own video platform, Epoch TV, which you can now subscribe to. Please check it out. Now that we're totally demonetized by YouTube, it's one of the main ways, of course, that we're going to be publishing a lot of our videos, although I will still be doing the live Q&As here. This is a way for us to get around all this censorship, a way for us to, deal with the current environment where there's a lot we can't talk about without having YouTube delete it. And so, folks, if you could, please check out Epoch TV. I think you'll very much like it. And again, we just published the interview with Victor Davis Hanson, and I have a few others going up soon. Now, that said, folks, as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. I'll try to get to them. And some big stories to talk about tonight. I have a breaking news, actually, about the audit happening in Arizona, where that's at. We're going to talk about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing, spreading its China model for the world right now and what they're doing inside China. Also going to talk about how they're subverting journalists here. Also some updates on what appears to be, and I don't want to see it, but what appears to be the brewings of possibly a war. Including, for example, with Israel, Syria, and possibly Iran, as well as with Russia and Ukraine, and possibly with China and Taiwan. There's some updates on this we'll be going into, and many other stories as well. And folks, that said, good to see you all here. Truth Watch, you said, is Epoch TV on YouTube? Epoch TV is actually run by the Epoch Times. So check out the Epoch Times, TheEpochTimes.com. And you can see the Epoch TV link on the left. And this is a video platform on our own servers run by us that cannot be censored. And so this is a way for us to get around YouTube censorship, and it's subscription-based, $4.99 a month, about the price of a cheaper cup of coffee, price of a latte, and so not too much. But again, when big business and so on is censoring everybody, really, this is our way of getting around it. You can actually go to Epoch TV directly. It's epochtv.com, EPOCHTV.com. And so, folks, please subscribe to Crossroads there. We have a whole bunch of channels on it already, and we're going to be adding more. Now, that said, folks, let's jump into some of the stories for the night. And good to see you all here. Yeah, Jack Delaney, good to see you as well. And 5808, good to see you. Hey, John Tibbles, I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, you folks are great. Lug Puka, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it, folks. Yeah, you're all great, folks. Good to see you all. All right, let's jump into some breaking news first. I just actually got a text message from a source in Arizona, and they sent to me this Superior Court document that just came out. This is the Senate, related to the Senate audit. A temporary restraining order has been filed against the Senate in Arizona to stop their audit of the voting machines. We were talking about how the state Senate in Arizona has moved forward with doing its audit. They have 4 different groups doing separate audits. This is the Superior Court document on this. The restraining order they placed on the Superior Court to block this from going through. And so somebody's trying to stop this investigation from happening in Arizona, folks. A lot of people trying to stop this investigation from happening in Arizona. And they've blocked several things previously. For example, they tried limiting the scope of it, saying you can't investigate this location specifically, even after it was approved. They were moving forward with it. Now groups have filed a temporary restraining order to block it, at least temporarily. And again, folks, this is them investigating what happened in the 2020 elections. Everyone remembers those security cameras in Maricopa County at the 11th hour. Maricopa County has been one of the big focuses. And there are a lot of people trying to block this investigation from happening. But that audit is there. They're still pushing it through. People are still behind it. Local officials there still behind it. And so this is a temporary, keyword here is temporary restraining order. But they are trying to delay this investigation from happening, right? They're trying to delay this from happening. I'll give you all updates on this as it goes forward. This is just breaking news, just got it in, and so I wanted to share that with you all. That said, folks, before we go into the main stories for the night, let's talk briefly about our supporters for the night. Now, I mentioned we are totally demonetized on YouTube. Luckily, though, we do have some sponsors. And tonight's episode is brought to you by American Hartford Gold. Now, American Hartford Gold, with all the turbulence in the economy, as I've mentioned before, the stock market, risks of inflation, you can consider investing in an asset that's often stable and is typically on the incline. That's gold and silver, especially now with these currency wars, with multi-trillion-dollar spending packages and so on. Gold and silver tends to be relatively stable. Now, American Hartford Gold is one of the highest rated firms in the country with an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. They can have your gold and silver delivered right to your doorstep or into your IRA. To learn more, please check out the link in the comments below where American Hartford Gold is providing a free 25-page information guide. And again, even if you just want information on how to invest in gold, what are the upsides and downsides of it, check it out. And if you call them now, you can get up to $1,500 on free silver for all qualifying first orders. The phone number for that is 877-260-2764, or you can text Joshua to 65532. Now, I want to go over what's happening with China because this is going to be one of the biggest issues going forward. Really, folks. I mean, in addition to what they're doing internally, right, which is a big deal in itself, slave labor, religious persecution. I mean, really some big updates on this. I'm going to go over just a bit. But also what they're doing to spread these things, including, for example, cooperating with politicians here in the United States, working with journalists, including people getting paid off, which we're going to go over tonight, as well as businesses paid off, working with them, hiding their information, censoring on their behalf, you name it. And some really freaky stuff happening in China right now, to say the least. This is in addition, right? This is the inside China stuff and some of the subversion. We're also going to go into tonight some of what they're doing to what appears to be try to start a war. And we mentioned before leaked documents, individuals in China. I mean, they're pretty open about it, ironically. Some of the top leaders in China talking not just about starting a war, but of starting 4 wars to keep the United States distracted. They believe that a single front war for the United States, China would pretty much fold. They wouldn't be able to make it. But they believe they need to start maybe 3 or 4 wars to keep the United States sufficiently divided in force in order to win. We're going to be going over what appears to be the brewings of this, because we do see now the start of what does line up with what they're saying. Now, first off, folks, let's go over what's happening with the Chinese Communist Party and their foreign control systems. Now, first of all, Epoch Times here reports, it says, this is inside China, it says Beijing asks people to call hotline to report netizens making, quote, illegal history comments. And this is big too. Now, what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing is it's been creating these social control systems in China and then exporting them. And so keep an eye on this, right? Let's go over what they're doing right now. The Chinese Communist Party is asking citizens to snitch on online internet users who fail to toe Beijing's line when commenting on Chinese history, according to a recent announcement by China's cyber regulator. The Cyberspace Administration of China, the CAC, in an announcement on April 9th, said that its long-existing hotline 12377, which allows people to report on online activities such as fraud and rumors. Sound familiar, folks? Rumors was now open to allow people to report on netizens who distort the CCP's history, attack party leaders and their thoughts and policies, and defame, quote, national heroes. Now, keep in mind when they talk about defaming national heroes and attacking China's history, they're not talking about attacking the history of China. They're talking specifically about attacking the version of China's history warped by the Chinese Communist Party. And folks, pay attention to this, because what the Chinese Communist Party is doing inside China is stuff they're trying to export. Now, I talked before about this new digital currency. Remember we were talking about this? China's launching this new digital currency. They were testing it. Now they're moving forward with it. What's happening now? They've gone to the international organization that is in charge of these centralized banks. That means America. That means every country with a centralized bank. And the Chinese Communist Party is using its model for centralized banks to create the global standard. They call them CBDCs, centralized banking digital currencies, and China is creating the standard for them. The Federal Reserve is working on it. They're talking about a new digital dollar. The European Union is working on a digital euro, modeled all of these after what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. And all of this is tied into these social control programs like this. Now, in the United States, where we have the Constitution, right, protecting us, protecting our free speech, protecting our rights to own firearms and things like this, what has the government been doing? The government has been bypassing, say, federal regulation on things that overly, I mean, they violate a little bit, things that overly violate the Constitution. What are they doing instead? They're bypassing it. They're going through private industry. They're bypassing it and going through the tech oligarchs. And what do you call it, folks, when big business and big government team up to create totalitarian control over a society? That's fascism, actual fascism. We see them, for example, knowing they can't, for example, push through laws to restrict gun ownership. What are they doing? They're pushing for laws to restrict gun manufacturers. They're attacking the businesses, the free market. When it comes to free speech, they can't restrict your free speech. They can't say they're reporting rumors and disinformation, right? Which is what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. Telling people they can report other people for spreading rumors, right? That's the key word. You have the same thing happening in the United States as we speak. Big tech is restricting you from reporting on what they deem as rumors. What they deem as things that go against the grain of the commonly accepted narrative that they're trying to push. And again, the China model for this is what is being adopted by a lot of these companies that work very closely with China. And here in the United States, where the federal government can't implement things that violate our, First Amendment rights to free speech, what are they doing? They're having House commissions, for example, House committees hold all these different tech oligarchs, heads of Facebook, Google, YouTube, you name it. Sorry, YouTube and Google are the same, but Twitter, you name it, where they're having them come and they're pressuring them and saying, why are you not censoring more? Why are you not censoring more? In other words, the cooperation, the federal government putting pressure on these big tech oligarchs to push for more censorship. And these big tech oligarchs, what is the model for censorship? China, in a lot of cases. China's pushing forward a lot of this. That new digital virus passport, right? Remember, folks, last year we were talking about this. That's the China model. Remember last year we were talking about how China was creating a health code on people's cell phones and how this is, the new wave of totalitarianism that China's building that's probably going to spread around the world. Here we are now, a year later, and yeah, this is the standard. What China is doing to create new forms of social control are what the tech oligarchs are adopting. And unfortunately, some folks in our federal government are getting behind it. And so pay attention to this, right? China has now created a system where citizens can report on other citizens if they're spreading rumors, what they call rumors, if they're criticizing Communist Party leaders, or if they're criticizing the altered history of the Chinese Communist Party. And what's going to happen here in the United States if the same thing is pushed? If you create, for example, they have the 1619 Project, falsified history pushed by the New York Times and now being adopted into their education system. Maybe if you question that, right? Maybe if you question that, you could be censored under, if programs like this are adopted. This is where things are heading. This is the China model. This is what they're pushing right now. Now, in addition to this, let's talk about what else China is doing right now, because this is important. And then I want to go into a bit of how they're exporting these systems, because there's some new updates on this as well. This is Bitter Winter reporting, a fantastic site talking about religious suppression in China. I believe it's run by House Christians. I might be wrong, though. Now, it reports, Bitter Winter reports, China National Security Education Day focused on fighting illegal religion. And of course, in China, what defines an illegal religion? Any version of a religion not run by the government, right? When it comes to Buddhism, they have the China Buddha Association, a state-run version of the religion that's altered, that they created after they put the real monks in prison and killed many of them. After they killed the abbots during the Cultural Revolution, they created the China Buddha Association to create the state-run version of the religion that is altered. If you step outside of that, you risk falling under the realm of illegal religion. Same thing with Christianity. There's the approved altered version, which even eliminates the first commandment from the 10 commandments. There's only 9 commandments in the CCP's state-run version of Christianity. You can also follow the Chinese Communist Party's version of Catholicism. If you fall outside of those, what are you? You're an illegal religion. You're a house Christian. You're a Falun Gong practitioner, people trying to revitalize the cultural, religious heritage of ancient China. If you practice, for example, real Taoism, real Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, yeah, you risk being persecuted. And of course, Muslim Uyghurs as well. The Chinese Communist Party is working very deeply on this right now, and here's what they're doing to roll it out. Bitter Winter also reports grid system used to target illegal religion. And it says the Orwellian system of dividing China into 100 by 100 meter grids for surveillance now includes grid offices in charge of hunting members of banned religious groups. You know that, folks? They created a grid system, like take China and put grids, squares over it, 100 by 100 meters. Every 100 by 100 meter square will have a new office, and each office is focused on hunting members of banned religious groups, which again means house Christians, Muslim Uyghurs, Falun Gong practitioners, and others. Any religion not approved by the Communist Party, and that means controlled by the Communist Party, or altered by it, if you want to take it down that road, is an illegal religion. And folks, as we're seeing now, even versions of Christianity being suppressed here in the United States, even certain religions being called extremist here in the United States, Christianity, for example, and some of these, race training doctrines they're pushing out. What's happening, right? It's the China model. This is the China model being exported. This is the kind of stuff they're spreading right now. Now, in addition to this, who normally tells us about programs like this? How is it that folks like you and I typically know? Well, of course, I have to follow the real sources, but how is it that most people can ever hear about this? How is it that government officials know what's happening in China? How is it that most think tanks learn about what's happening in China? How is it that the average voter knows about what's happening in China? The average consumer knows what's happening in China? Typically, you rely on journalists. And what happens if the journalists begin working for the Communist Party of China while maintaining their surface level jobs at whatever media they're in? What happens when the journalists begin cooperating with them, taking paid dinners with them, and begin to get coerced by them? Well, here's another story for you. This is National Pulse reporting. It says, named and shamed, the, quote, journalists who went on Chinese Communist Party junkets then delivered favorable coverage. And this is according to National Pulse, Natalie Winters, great investigative reporter they have over there. It says, unearthed documents from one of the leading Chinese Communist Party propaganda groups reveal the names of mainstream U.S. journalists, they actually have the names of them, taking junkets from the group in exchange for favorable coverage. The National Pulse can exclusively reveal. The China-United States Exchange Foundation, or CUSEF, was founded by the vice chairman of the highest-ranking entity overseeing Chinese Communist Party's United Front Department, an effort which aims to, quote, co-opt and neutralize sources of potential opposition to the policies and authority of the Chinese government. The United Front strategy uses a range of methods to influence overseas Chinese communities, foreign governments, and other actors to take actions or adopt positions supportive of Beijing's preferred policies, the U.S. government report states about this group. Now, they say CUSEF uses United Front Department tactics, including front organizations like CUSEF, of influence on Western journalists from virtually every Western media outlet. And this is CNN, New York Times, MSNBC, The Washington Post, and many more. Groups that we're depending on, or a lot of people depend on, maybe not us, groups a lot of people depend on for their news. And what happens, folks, when China has no-go topics, when China says you can talk about anything you want here except for these 5 topics, except for this sensitive political issue because it will hurt the feelings of the Chinese people, which is what they actually say. You can't talk about our slave labor camps because talking about it hurts the feelings of the Chinese people. That's what the CCP says. That's how they make journalists censor themselves. This is, it brings up this century of humiliation where the rest of the world was so mean to China. And when you criticize our genocides and our slave labor camps, it just brings up those feelings because the rest of the world is just so mean to us. This is how they get journalists and academics to silence themselves. I'm not even joking. That's the narrative they use. This is the real narrative they use. In fact, a lot of our even military leaders are educated on this whole century of humiliation, they call it. This is a way for the Chinese Communist Party to use race issues to silence media coverage, in addition to them doing, for example, paid party junkets, where reporters go on these party junkets, where they go on these trips with the Chinese Communist Party, literally one of its front organizations under the United Front Work Department, one of its overt spy departments, focused on suppressing Chinese communities abroad and focused on spreading the CCP's disinformation. Journalists taking these trips, and again, some of the big name media working with them on this, right? This is what they're doing. How do you rely then on media to tell you what's really happening if they're taking paid dinners and paid trips from the Chinese Communist Party, and then their coverage begins to reflect the special interest they become part of? That's what's happening. And again, folks, as we see the issue that the CCP is creating these internal programs, grid-based religious persecution being one of them, programs to report on your neighbor that really watch for that, because a lot of the other programs of suppression the CCP has been creating are now being adopted outside China. Again, your virus passport, again, the new digital currencies, and watch out for the next big one, which is going to be state capitalism, where the government takes part ownership over every single business. These are the ones to watch out for, folks, because this is what's next on their agenda. Now, that said, folks, let's go a bit more into what's happening with this. Epoch Times reports this. It says China presses foreign governments and companies to disregard human rights, according to a U.S. report. And so it's not just media, right? We talked about what the CCP is doing, how the narratives they use to silence people, how they do it, how they bribe them, and how they work with the media to cover all this up. But guess what? It's not just media. It is foreign governments, including U.S. government officials, including officials in most countries across Europe, throughout Latin America, throughout Africa, Australia, many other countries, many parts of Asia as well. They do the same thing in every place because they're kind of lazy about it, to be honest. They use the same model in every place, sometimes through the exact same organizations. Canada, they do it. In fact, Canada has been warning about it for a long time. You can check out the Sidewinder report from, close to 2 decades ago, I believe. They've been warning about it for a long time. In fact, the Canadian equivalent of the CIA released that report, the Sidewinder report, I believe it's close to 2 decades ago, and they got called racist for releasing it. But let's go into this, right? This is what they're doing. Epoch Times reports China's religious freedom violations and its growing influence and activities beyond its borders were, quote, the most troubling developments of last year, according to an independent, bipartisan U.S. federal government commission. In its 2021 annual report released on April 21st, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USCIRF, called out China as one of the world's egregious violators of religious freedom, saying the conditions in China further deteriorated in 2020. It says this year's report highlighted not only Beijing's abuses targeting its own people, but also its growing international influence on religious freedom and human rights. Sound familiar? International influence on religious freedom and human rights. In other words, folks, they are exporting it. They are exporting what we're talking about. It says the commission found that Beijing's economic and geopolitical influence overseas had negatively affected rights and freedoms in other countries. And it says this, quote, tactics include harassment, intimidation, and detainment of human rights activists, ethnic and religious minorities, and other critics of dissidents, it states. And folks, if you have ethnic and religious minorities, human rights activists, critics, dissidents, getting attacked under the CCP model, why are all the groups that claim to care about minorities and claim to care about ethnic diversity and so on, why are they not sounding the alarm on this? Why are these big businesses that push this woke agenda in the United States not pulling out of China right now? Why are they not ending their business relationships with these slave camps in the Xinjiang region? Why are they not all openly criticizing the Chinese Communist Party? Why is the NBA not criticizing slave labor in China instead of doing the opposite and silencing people within their own business from doing so, right? Why is the Major League Baseball, why is Major League Baseball criticizing the U.S. for having voting integrity, including very basic voting ID laws, right, in Georgia, while at the same time making deals with the Chinese Communist Party when they're doing this? The same thing they claim to oppose. Why is this? Let's go into it a bit more, right? Let's go into this just a bit more. Now, it says this, countries, including Turkey, have yielded to Beijing's pressure by silencing critics and even repatriating Uyghur refugees to China. In other words, Muslims fleeing genocide are being sent back to face possible genocide by the Chinese Communist Party. And this is one of the big ironies you have even in the Muslim world, is some countries that claim to be against the great Satan of, what they call Israel or the United States, openly persecute Muslims based on their faith by working together with the Chinese Communist Party, meaning that for some of these countries, it's not really about religion, right? It's about politics. It says religious freedom violations by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, and its growing threats and intimidations overseas, quote, represented the most troubling developments that we saw in 2020. This is according to Tony Perkins, U.S. CIRF Vice Chair. And he said this during a virtual press conference on April 21st. The Chinese regime is also forcing international companies, including U.S. firms, including American businesses, to disregard human rights abuses in China, threatening company executives to, quote, choose between complying with U.S. laws and China laws, right? They are being forced to choose whether they follow American law or the laws of the Chinese Communist Party, including, for example, either participating in, such as with slave labor, or turning a blind eye to the abuses happening in China as we speak, including slave labor, including genocide. And folks, again, when you take this in connection, what we talked about, where the media is also working with them, where politicians are also working with them, and where the totalitarian policies being rolled out by the Chinese Communist Party are beginning to spread overseas, this is becoming a much bigger issue. And again, folks, a lot of what most of you know here, right? We've all been talking about this for a good, solid year just on this channel. Most of you have been following this channel know this stuff. We've been talking about this now for over a year. This is the future. If the Chinese Communist Party is not properly challenged, this is the future for the world. And we already see now the things they're putting in place being rolled out in other parts of the world. The next step, as I mentioned, the next step is probably going to be something related to censorship, very likely tied to, for example, rumors, right? Censorship programs based on rumors. And y'all might have seen Mike Lindell. Mike Lindell has his new platform, Frank, right? Speaking frankly, or frankly speaking, or what they call it. His new social media, Frank, which has been down because he says he's under cyber attack, but he's been doing 24-hour broadcasts, live videos where he's been chatting. One thing he's mentioned is that some of these fact checkers in the U.S. including Epoch Times has reported on this. Some of these fact checkers actually work with Chinese companies. Some of these fact checkers work with companies that have to abide by Chinese censorship laws in order to spread the interests of the CCP, among them ByteDance. How is it that ByteDance, a company whose head has publicly actually wrote a public self-criticism because he was being attacked by the CCP, wrote a public self-criticism where he stated his allegiance to the Communist Party and where he stated that he would use his company to promote the narratives of the Communist Party of China. How is it that someone who's taken an oath and given a public statement saying they're going to do it, saying they're going to use their company, ByteDance, which owns TikTok, how are you going to have a company, the head of the company comes out and says he's going to censor, right? He says he's going to spread the CCP's propaganda. He writes a letter publicly saying it. And this individual is allowed to be part of these different fact checkers that are censoring our news on American soil, censoring media on American soil. Right, not my potato, it said frank speech. That's Mike Lindo's platform. It's happening already, folks. Happening right before our eyes. Exactly what we've been talking about. It's all happening right now. And again, next big thing's coming up. Censorship of rumors, already starting to do it. Maybe expanding that not just to rumors, but to their version of history. If you criticize their warped version of history, like i.e. the 1619 Project, maybe that'll get you banned. And at the same time, folks, on top of that, they're going to be pushing forward with other programs as well. The next one's going to be the digital passport, the virus passport, which you probably got to get renewed every year. And the next one after that is going to be very likely, again, this program of exporting this new digital currency. And folks, again, that's why we have Epoch TV, because they can't censor it. And so actually another trailer we have here, another interview publishing soon. We'll jump into that now.
I don't even care if this ever makes any money. I just want it to exist for my kids and my grandkids. We need a better future going forward.
What were the problems you saw with children's entertainment that made you want to create this show?
Well, I think some of the biggest problems that we're seeing is you don't really see free market principles taught in entertainment hardly at all. We find that people are really wanting resources to pass the values of freedom down to their kids. We as parents, who really are the primary educators of our kids, especially in the early stages, if we can kind of take responsibility for that and pass these values on down to our kids and begin to play the long game, I think there's a lot of hope for the future.
All right, folks. Now let's jump into the questions for the night. And so again, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. And again, folks, you want to support us now, please go to epochtv.com, EPOCHTV.com. This is a platform they can't censor. It's $5 a month, right? About the cost of a decent latte, let's say. If you pay less than $5, it's probably not a very good latte, let's be honest. But about the price of a decent latte, $5 a month, $4.99 a month. And again, folks, you're helping us stand up for free speech. You're helping us stand up for a platform that they cannot censor. And I'd love to we'd love to make it free for you all. But of course, with the current situation where most of the big woke companies are unfortunately on the same boat, it's hard to get sponsors, right? It's hard to find big advertisers. And so, our platforms, folks, mostly supported by folks like you, mostly supported by, again, subscriptions. And so really, please support us. $4.99 a month. You get Crossroads and a bunch of other channels of the Epoch Times. We're going to be rolling out even more in addition to this. We're going to have our documentaries there, a special feature series. We're working on quite a few right now. So a lot of shows there. And again, folks, you're helping us create uncensored news. You're helping us make a stand on a platform that cannot be censored and with infrastructure that can't be censored. And so please help us make this stand. And if you already have a subscription to the Epoch Times, digital subscription, I think $7.99 a month, you can add $2 to that. and you get Epoch TV as well. So folks, please check that out. Please consider subscribing, and please, if you can, tell a friend about it. That's epochtv.com, EPOCH TV.com. Now, that said, folks, let's jump into the questions for the night. Let's see here. This is this is from Zoe S. You said, good evening, Joshua. Would you please give us an update on what's going on with Hong Kong? Well, as we speak, the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party is pushing forward with its programs to censor media. They're now going after Phoenix TV, which is kind of bizarre because Phoenix TV was already kind of under the CCP. It's already pretty tied to the Communist Party already. And so the fact that they're going after them even more is a bit bizarre. But this fits a broader trend happening in mainland China right now. We saw, for example, Jack Ma get taken out, right? We saw, for example, Alibaba, which was his company, get taken over more deeply by the CCP. We see different big companies in China getting attacked, people within the company getting investigated, and the CCP using that to seize more control over the private industry. It's happening now in Hong Kong as well. Now, this is tied to the broader picture, which we've been discussing on this show, which is the Chinese Communist Party is pushing forward with this new mixed model economy, as they're calling it, where the government is going to have state capitalism. They call it state capitalism. What is state capitalism? It's socialism. Literally, what it means is that the state, the government, owns the capitalist systems. What do you call it when the state owns the system of capitalism? When the state seizes the means of production? What do you call it, folks? Seize the means of production. What do you call it again? It's socialism. The CCP is pushing forward with a Mao era type of socialism. Again, animated by their communist ideology, pushing forward for the great communist utopia, as they believe. But again, communism in practice is always socialism, right? The form it takes is socialism. The belief is communism. This is what they're doing, and they're doing it right now in Hong Kong as well. Also, you might have seen, we talked about it before. Four thugs broke into the printing press of Epoch Times in Hong Kong, and they smashed our printers with sledgehammers. Last I heard, I do believe we have our printers back up and running now. But again, I haven't heard too many updates since then. We are under a lot of pressure in Hong Kong. Now, we're blacklisted in mainland China. We can't print in mainland China. But we are in Hong Kong and in Taiwan, and of course in most free countries in the world still. We have digital editions in most countries. These were 23 countries, 17 languages, I think. And so, we do have a Chinese edition, but it's, of course, deeply under attack by the Chinese Communist Party. And also the CCP has been putting different leaders of the Hong Kong democracy protests behind bars. They're being sentenced right now, currently. Some of them are being sentenced. I believe that Joshua Wong got 17 months in prison last I heard. And so this is what's happening in Hong Kong. Real quick, Cynthia L., you said, who owns Epoch Times? Epoch Times is a private company, independent, started by Chinese Americans in Atlanta, actually. The owner is an individual named John Tong, great guy. And he tends to not go public very often, but he's a good guy. So Epoch Times dedicated to freedom, and honestly, one of the biggest enemies of the Chinese Communist Party regards us as like public enemy number one. In fact, they have annual meetings in China through the CCP on how to destroy us every year. So just to emphasize how much they don't like us, but I'm sure you all see why, right? I probably wouldn't like me very much either if I were them, let's put it that way. All right, folks, next question here. This is from Stonewolf 2077. You said, Josh, do you think China will push North Korea to increase its aggression against the South Koreans or invade? I do think it's very likely. In fact, I'd say it's almost without a doubt. I'll be going into this in just a bit. I'll give you a quick overview of what's happening. I'll be going in depth into this in just a bit, but let's do a quick overview. Russia has troops along the Ukrainian border right now. They're holding trainings on it, and the Ukrainians are worried Russia's going to invade again. So you have Russia renewing its conflicts with Ukraine. You have Iran threatening Israel, saying that there was a cyber attack on their nuclear plant, and saying it amounts to a nuclear attack. They're talking about retaliation. Then what happens? Syria, Syria fires missiles at the Israeli nuclear plant, one of the main Israeli nuclear plants. Israel retaliated. And now you have possible war between Syria and Israel, and very likely as well with Iran, if they're very likely to get involved with it. That's 2 wars. And now you have North Korea renewing its threats, working very closely with Xi Jinping. There's been new photos of them working together. It used to be that Kim Jong-un was not as close with Xi. His father, Kim Jong, what was his name? It's been too long. Kim Il-sung and his father and grandfather were very close to the Jiang faction in China. And so after his father died and he took over, you saw a lot of conflicts emerge between the Xi faction and with the North Koreans. And it looked for a while that tensions were breaking up. They've fixed those. Xi Jinping now is working very closely with Kim Jong-un. And so based on this and based on the documents we've seen previously and things we talked about in the show, where the CCP has been talking openly, not even trying to hide it, that they need to start 4 wars to distract the United States if they were to launch their own attacks, right? If China were to invade Taiwan, and that's moving forward right now, they are pushing for it. They've advanced the timetable for it. As this is happening, they've also talked about renewing terrorist attacks because the CCP, even in their own documents, even according to folks, some of the top influencers in China, people who advise the top bodies, including the United Front, they talk about it openly. They talk about how they use terrorism in order to keep the U.S. distracted. They're going to be doing that again, very likely. And again, who's the biggest sponsor of terrorism? Iran, which works very close with the Chinese Communist Party. That's 4 wars, folks. And again, China talking about invading Taiwan amidst all this. This is the trajectory. Now, whether it will happen, who knows? Maybe something will happen to stop it. Maybe the free world will get together and start criticizing them, condemn them hard enough. Maybe they'll have internal issues that stop it from happening. But as we currently look at it, that is the trajectory. This is where things are heading. Sorry, the text is a bit small. Monica Morris, you said, Josh, are the Chinese commanded to worship the CCP leadership yet? Actually, yes. In fact, especially during the virus outbreak, during the lockdowns in China, the normal temples were closed down. The ones that were still open were party worship temples. And I think I've talked about this before. Yeah, we have talked about this before on Crossroads. Actually, Bitter Winter has a lot of articles on this. If you check out Bitter Winter, they have party worship in China. Like, not just like in the US where you have people who don't believe in a power higher than government and look to the government as like God, right? Where they see the government as like, the highest power there is. They actually worship government officials in China. At least this is being pushed by the Chinese Communist Party. A few things with this. One thing they were doing for a while is having worshiping of Mao Zedong, right? Again, former Communist Party leader Mao Zedong, where they have different temples and they have golden statues of Mao and golden statues of his wife. They've actually been bulldozing temples, replacing with temples like this. They've been repurposing traditional temples, including folk temples, going in there, getting rid of the statues of Buddha or getting rid of the statues of Jesus, because Christianity has actually been in China for a long time. And they're putting in statues of Mao Zedong and his wife, Madame Mao, for worship. And so, yes, they do have party worship in China. This is being encouraged by the Chinese Communist Party. They're expanding it to worship of other Communist Party figures. Other Communist Party leaders have also been deified under the Chinese Communist Party. They have golden statues of, Mao Zedong and others. This is happening in China. And this was moved forward during the lockdowns, during the virus lockdowns, because they closed down a lot of the normal temples, right? They closed down a lot of the normal temples. They've been bulldozing a lot of temples, tearing down churches, tearing down crosses, desecrating Buddhist monasteries, you name it, and putting in their places these temples which were not closed down during the lockdowns, where you can worship Communist Party leaders. So yes, this is happening in China. This is from Tony Goza. He said, when is China invading Taiwan? There's not a clear timetable on it. They're talking about it. They're getting very aggressive with it, and they are moving the timetable forward on it. Currently, the news is that they're launching political warfare attacks on Taiwan in order to undermine the government there. They're softening them from the ideological standpoint right now. From Marilu Pilar, you said, "Hi, Josh, do you have any updates on Cuomo?" This is Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York. He said, "Thank you." I haven't heard any updates on that. Of course, Cuomo was accused of, well, the evidence is pretty strong, but innocent till proven guilty, right? He's accused of having sent people who had the virus to nursing homes where you had large amounts of deaths caused by government action, and where in these incidents, his office was covering it up, right? That's the allegation. And of course, what happens as soon as it starts coming out where, hey, the governor of New York may be guilty of like mass manslaughter, thousands of people, what do? They start coming out with sexual harassment and sexual assault allegations. And that becomes the narrative. That becomes the story. But the important thing to note with what Cuomo did is that what Cuomo did was done by other government officials across the United States. At least 4 different states did the same thing. And so what would happen if Cuomo was investigated and maybe prosecuted on the real crime that took place, or the real alleged crime that took place, right? Which is sending seniors with the virus, forcing senior homes to take them in. And then when thousands of people die, you cover it up, right? Other officials are doing the exact same thing. And so if Cuomo faced charges for that, if he had to step down from office for it, and folks, this is my take on it, if you can have a police officer kneel on someone's neck and the individual dies of a combination of the stress from that and from drugs in their system and underlying health problems, and a police officer can face 74 years in prison, well, I would hope that a government official could be held to the same standards, especially if they are responsible potentially for the deaths of thousands of people. And again, through state directive, forcing people to adopt things against their will, forcing them to do things that went against public health, which possibly caused thousands of deaths. And yeah, if Cuomo is facing charges for that, if he's investigated for that, if that actually goes through, and it seems to be the media has just pivoted to focus on the sexual harassment allegations, right, and the sexual assault allegations. If that goes through, then that's going to be a national scandal because other states did the same thing, right? Other governors, other public officials did the exact same thing. Actually, on that note, I should make a correction from last 2 episodes, but last night in particular. Now, I mentioned, talking about the death of George Floyd, I misinterpreted the information from the medical examiner on the cause of Floyd's death. Again, we were talking about what was the cause of his death. And I talked about it was a mixture of issues, right? But just for the sake of keeping things on the facts, because I think I mentioned, I believe, that he had fatal levels of fentanyl in his system. It appears that the levels of fentanyl and methamphetamines would not normally be fatal. It's questionable whether it was still fatal to him because his arteries, I believe, are like 75 to 95% blocked. And so his threshold of what was lethal might have been different. But according to, again, the medical examiner there, Dr. Andrew Baker, the Hennepin County medical examiner again, concluded that, quote, it was the stress of that interaction, right? It was the stress of the interaction that tipped him over the edge, given his underlying heart disease and his toxicological status. And so they're saying that the drugs were not enough to be fatal by themselves, but the stress of the interaction, this is the direct quote, the stress of the interaction that tipped him over. It was the stress of the interaction that tipped him over, given his underlying heart disease and his toxicological status. Again, the fentanyl and methamphetamines in his system. He was high on meth and fentanyl. And so while, again, the methamphetamine and fentanyl system may have contributed to his death, according to the medical examiner, they may not have been fatal by themselves. And of course, I regret the error. I should stick to the technical facts. And so I do apologize for saying that the levels would have been fatal by themselves, because it seems it was the combination of it. That said, let's go another question, a couple more questions, then we'll go into some more stories. This is from Yvette Torres. Yvette Torres. You said, is it possible China is also behind the blockade of the audit? Folks who weren't here in the beginning of the show, I had breaking news from Arizona, where I said that there is a temporary restraining order that's been filed against the state Senate to block the audit of the election in Maricopa County. Again, this is the investigation they have of what happened during the 2020 elections. Here you actually have the document from the court there, temporary restraining order, blocking this. And so what they're doing is they're delaying the investigation. They're trying to stop the investigation from going through. You said, is it possible China is also behind the blockade of this audit? I mean, I don't have any evidence on that. I have not seen any evidence on it. I'd have to look into the individuals who put the restraining order through, and if we could look into the individuals or companies or whoever put it through, we could look at them and see whether they have influence from individuals tied to the Chinese Communist Party, and maybe. I think it'd be a jump to say it right now. There's no evidence that I'm aware of showing that China is involved in this, but somebody's trying to block it. Somebody does not want this audit to take place. And again, they are using many means to try to prevent this audit from happening. Previously, they were trying to limit the scope of it, saying you can't investigate this area or that area because the technical requirements within the court order allowing the audit to move forward didn't include X and X and X. And so you can't investigate these areas. And now, again, you have the next step of this, which is they put through a temporary restraining order to slow things down. Now, it's unclear what they're doing with this, because it's not going to stop the audit from happening, very likely, but it is slowing it down, right? It's preventing things from moving forward. And again, folks, I'll keep you updated on this. This was breaking news, and so I only saw it shortly before starting the broadcast. And, we will be looking into it. I'll keep you all updated with what's happening with it. All right, let's do one more question, and then we'll go deeper into some of the stories for the night. This is from Gomez Adams. He said, have you made precautions against cyber attacks like Mike is experiencing in Frank's speech? So, folks, the Epoch Times has been under attack from the Chinese Communist Party from the get-go. In fact, our networks are under cyber attack so often that we almost don't even notice it. And why is that? It's because our IT team is probably one of the best in the world. And not to toot our horn on it, but we deal with regular Chinese cyber attacks. We deal with frequent, regular cyber attacks, like to the point where it's like a daily, normal thing for us. And so, yes, we are hardened against those types of cyber attacks. Yes, we do have systems in place to at least deal with it. They can slow it down a little bit, but yeah, that is happening. And so, yeah, don't worry about it, folks. We are able to deal with attacks like that. It's been very rare that they've been able to take us offline. If they do take us offline, it's for a very short time. It's been very rare for us that even when we are under cyber attack, that it's enough to actually stop us. ShareBear79 said they slow mode me. Yes, folks, I'm sorry. We do use slow mode on the chats here, and I know a lot of you don't like it, and I do apologize. But if we don't turn on slow mode, you get sometimes trolls who come in and they just spam the chat. And those of you who've been watching this channel for maybe a year might remember that we had that a lot, where you get one angry guy who comes in and they just copy and paste something and just keep hitting paste and keep hitting enter, and they gum up the whole chat, and the chat becomes unusable. We do have to use slow mode just to deal with that problem because it happens. It was happening to us regularly to the extent where it was making the chat very difficult to use for a lot of you. And again, it's hard to deal with. And I know it's if you want to make a few comments close, it delays it. And so I do apologize, but we have to use it to prevent those kinds of attacks because we were getting them. And one more point, you said, will you be able to live stream on Epoch TV? And so again, yes, we have launched Epoch TV, EPOCHTV.com, which going forward will be the main channel for Crossroads and other channels of the Epoch Times. We will keep our YouTube channel for as long as they let us. But in the meantime, folks, please, please, please check out epochtv.com. $5 a month. Really would appreciate your support there. This is an uncensored platform. You said, will we be able to live stream? We're working on it. Currently, no. And so the live streams here for now, and we'll have to see what we do going forward, given, again, the censorship we've been going under with YouTube. But we are working on the live stream functions for Epoch TV. And as soon as that starts working, hopefully we'll have this show being broadcasted in maybe a few places simultaneously. We'll have to see how we do it. And so, yeah, we are working on that. Should be soon, possibly next week. I don't want to overpromise on it because I tend to do that. Hopefully next week, based on the current progress we have with it. So hopefully very soon we will have the ability to live stream. Now, folks, it's getting late, so I want to make sure we go over a few more stories because I want to talk about what's happening with these brewing conflicts. There's some really big stuff happening with Iran, Syria, Israel, Russia, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, and possibly the United States. This is where things are heading. Let me go into this. And by the way, tonight's drink is a ginseng tea. It's wonderful. You get ginseng root, boil it for 20 minutes. A bit of honey. It's wonderful. I've been my personal favorite lately. But let's go into now the possibility of global world war. Sorry, folks. You have to laugh at the madness sometimes. You know what I mean? All right, let's go into it, folks. Currently where things are at, you do have the brewings of a pretty big conflict. We'll have to see how it goes. One of the things we're likely going to see, now there's a few possibilities. I'll go into them just a bit, the details of this. A few things we might be seeing. One is very likely localized conflicts. Again, within the Middle Eastern region, Iran, Syria, possibly Israel. Localized conflicts, possibly the bringing back of the war in Afghanistan. They're talking about keeping troops there for the time being, at least until September 11th. You have this happening right now. You have right now North Korea renewing threats. You have right now Russia putting troops on the border of Ukraine. You have all these things lining up. Possibility is localized threats. Possibility is world war. Hopefully it will not go to that level. But at the very least, we're going to have a Cold War type scenario where, again, you have localized conflicts with mercenaries, front organizations, U.S. backing some, other countries backing the others, right? And things moving forward with that. We'll have to see how it goes, though, because if the United States actually has to step in fully, which they might, especially with Israel and especially with Taiwan, if the U.S. has to step in, this could turn into a much bigger war. And let's go into what's happening. Now, first of all, Syrian missile explodes in area near Israel nuclear reactor, and Israel has retaliated. This is big, folks. This just happened. A Syrian missile exploded in southern Israel on Thursday. That's today. The Israeli military said in an incident that triggered warning sirens near the secretive Dimona nuclear reactor and an Israeli strike in Syria. An Israeli military spokesman identified the projectile as an SA-5 surface-to-air missile fired by Syrian forces against Israeli aircraft. And it continues saying the missile did not hit the reactor, but exploded some 30 kilometers, 19 miles away. And the individual said that Israel's anti-missile system had attempted to intercept it, but were unsuccessful. And in response, Israel launched further overnight attacks inside Syria. The military spokesman said, targeting several missile batteries, including the one that fired the SA-5. Now, folks, this happens. This is Israel getting attacked and then launching a counterattack on Syria. This happens as Iran is threatening war on Israel, and again renewing nuclear programs. Next story here. Iran says 60% enrichment meant to show nuclear prowess, but saying it's reversible. And Iran began enriching uranium but to 60% purity in order to show its technical capacity after a sabotage attack at a nuclear plant, which they blame on Israel. And the move is quickly reversible if the United States lifts its sanctions, they are saying. Now, talks in Vienna aimed at bringing the United States and Iran back to full compliance with the nuclear deal Trump pulled out of. They're working on that now, but Iran is renewing its nuclear programs. They're saying it's not for weapons, but how reliable is that? While at the same time threatening war with Israel, while at the same time this new localized conflict is happening. And again, we didn't pull troops out of Afghanistan, and the Biden administration wants to keep them there now till September 11th. If a localized conflict renews, the chance of us pulling out of Afghanistan is very slim. And again, if a new terror war starts, especially with Iran back on the scene, which will back things like that. Anyone remember when Trump killed that Iranian general, right, with that missile? And what happened? It turned out that general was trying to start strikes in Iraq against American targets. In other words, starting a proxy war against the United States. That's how they do it, folks. Proxy wars. You have a general from one country, Iran in that case, go to another country where you have American troops and there's a localized battle already, launch an attack against civilian or American targets, and then bring a country back into a war. That's how they do it. And again, folks, this is where it's heading. In addition to this, Russia orders troops back after massive drills in Crimea. It says, this is another article, it says Russia's defense minister on Thursday ordered troops back to their permanent bases following massive drills in Crimea. That's technically Ukraine, although Russia technically conquered it, part of it at least. That involves dozens of Navy ships, hundreds of warplanes, and thousands of troops in a show of force amid tensions with Ukraine. And another story here. Ukraine says Russia will soon have over 120,000 troops on its borders. 120,000 troops on the Ukrainian border. And it says here, Russia will soon have more than 120,000 troops on Ukraine's border. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said on Tuesday, calling for new Western economic sanctions to deter Moscow from further escalation. Folks, guess what? China now has its digital currency. China's pushing the digital currency, which means Western sanctions will no longer have any meaning. The ability of the United States and of the free world to use sanctions to punish countries for violating principles of international freedom and order, that's over. That stage of the world, the Pax Americana, where we could sanction countries and keep relative order through sanctions, that is coming to an end because of this new digital currency. And so this type of aggression, this type of abuse, this type of potential aggression leading to war, this is where things are heading. In addition to this, folks, not to overdo it, but in addition to this, the U.S. military officials are warning of China's alarming increase in naval and nuclear military power. And in addition to this, the Taiwanese president is warning about the Chinese regime's psychological warfare being launched against the island. And so, folks, this is where things are at currently. This is where things are heading. And if the United States doesn't stand up closely with Taiwan and other countries, and again, these war game operations they have are predicting that if the U.S. were to intervene in, for example, a war between Taiwan and China, that the U.S. may lose. Although, honestly, it's unclear how reliable those war games are because previous war games showed otherwise. They have showed otherwise before, although they've played out differently depending on the tactics used. The main issue being that the U.S. doesn't have the ability to base assets other than on ships in that region, and it's very difficult for us to support them based on that. Unless the U.S. can really make a show of force in that region, unless the U.S. can make a show of force in all these regions, unless we had a strong leadership or a strong leader to go out there and call them names and put them back in their places and say this isn't going to fly and get all the free world together to stand up against it, this is where things are happening. And folks, again, we'll have to see where it goes. On that, I'll be keeping you all updated on this. This as well as, again, the social issues here in the United States, which is changing the basis of the standards for the free world, as well as, again, the things the Chinese Communist Party is creating, its subversion of the rest of the world, and the things it's pushing through with that. All of this, folks, is where things are at right now. And again, going forward, I'm going to be covering all this. And so really going to be focusing on these issues, keeping you all updated on it. And so, folks, again, we're doing these live broadcasts every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday. So please tune in again this Sunday at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And in the meantime, folks, please, please, please support us on epochtv.com, EPOCH TV.com, EPOCH TV.com. We'd really appreciate your support. And folks, we have a lot of shows there. Crossroads are going to be putting a lot of our episodes exclusively on there. I'll still be doing the Q&As here, so please, again, tune in this coming Sunday. And folks, as always, really appreciate your support. Folks, that said, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, stay free. Thank you.